football portion, let's discuss Chris Harris, 1 year, $12 million contract with the Denver Broncos. We've talked quite a bit about the importance of cornerbacks, the importance of coverage, and more specifically, the importance of covering the slot. And here at PFF, and maybe even part of my Jets pitch later on, maybe it's time to flip the script on the value of the slot cornerback versus the outside cornerback. And Chris Harris would be the perfect example of a guy with consistent, elite play at slot cornerback throughout the majority of his career, while still being good on the outside as well. I mean, he's maybe the best cornerback in the NFL during his time. And he's top three. Yeah. He's up there with Sherman and Patrick Peterson and all those guys.
I think what makes him so great is that ability that he can play both, right? Most slot cornerbacks, even the most great slot cornerbacks, are only slot cornerbacks, right? They're amazing players, but they always get this kind of this slight thrown at them. It's like, well, they only play the slot, as if playing outside is inherently harder, which it might not be. It's a different skill set, as we've kind of tried to articulate before.
Right.
And arguably covering inside is more valuable, even if you're doing it less, because you're only doing it when you go to nickel snaps. There's this inherent amount of base snaps where you don't see the field, right? Because the two corners on the outside are always there. The third guy covering the slot comes in sub packages. So those guys are playing less. So even if it's probably nets out somewhere, in the middle, maybe even somewhere to the outside being more valuable simply because they're on the field more. But it was always thrown at these guys as a slight. Well, they only play the slot. They don't cover outside. But Harris has always done both. He's covered the slot and he's been their second corner. So when they're in the base snaps, he's one of the two outside guys. And then when they go to nickel or dime, he goes inside and the third guy they bring in just plays the boundary, plays the outside. So his ability to be able to do that is probably unique. Is there anybody that's done that the entire time? He's done it like certain corners. Patrick Peterson has had times where he's shadowed receivers and he's followed them to the slot. Revis used to follow people to the slot.
But they would have, 20, 25, 30 slot targets in a year, not 50, 60, 70, right? It was only a handful here and there. Here's a comparison, right? So over the last 3 years, during the regular season, the highest graded slot cornerbacks, it's Desmond King from the Chargers, number 1, and then Chris Harris, number 2. But all the other guys on this list, I don't know why you're not using the notes that I sent you. You can't read those?
Because I
it's
don't
like
have
size 4 font.
I don't have the capacity of zooming in beyond the 200% that I'm currently
doing my best,
which already isn't enough.
So Desmond King, Chris Harris, Justin Coleman, Patriots plus Seahawks, Nickel Roby-Coleman, Mike Hilton, Bryce Callahan. Everybody else on that list is a pure slot corner. None of those guys are playing on the outside on base downs, right, in base defense. Chris Harris is the only guy that is doing that. So he's got the number 2 slot grade just over the last 3 years. And we're talking about a guy who's had elite years before that, 2015, 14. I mean, he was outstanding all of those seasons. But he also has the number 8 grade playing on the outside during that time, behind guys like Casey Hayward, Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie, which is a smaller sample size, but I'm still surprised to see him out there. A.J. Boye, Aqib Talib, Jalen Ramsey, Darius Slay, and Chris Harris is up there. Really 7th if you eliminate, who's this? Kendall Fuller from the Chiefs only has 25 targets. So how about that?
Yeah.
So number 8 on the outside, number 2 in the slot over just the last 3 years.
Right. I think he's been honestly perennially underrated throughout his entire career. It took part of that is when you come into the league as an undrafted free agent, you're working against a fairly hefty bias to begin with to convince people that you're amazing. It's easier when you play, running back or something where the yards speak for themselves. But if you're a cornerback, it's harder to obviously demonstrate that you're significantly better than everybody thought you were when you came into the league. So Harris has been working against that for a while. And then even then, once people accept you're good, it's, well, how good is he? We know Patrick Peterson shadows people, albeit, PEDs. Richard Sherman used to, shut down one side of the field, et cetera, et cetera. So those guys everybody said they were great. But Harris, he does really well. He plays the slot, but, how good is he? But I think according to the grades, he's probably a hell of a lot better than you thought he was, even if you thought he was really good.
Yeah, and the thing about Harris, too, he's played multiple schemes. I mean, he played under Jack Del Rio, which is a little bit more of a zone-heavy scheme. We've seen him. We always talk about how playing cornerback is not just playing man coverage, right? It's the ability to have a feel for route concepts, for tackling, all these little things. He does all of those things extremely well. Does not miss a ton of tackles. He plays zone really well. When Wade Phillips came in, he had that no-fly zone 2015, other than the game when Antonio Brown absolutely torched him, which kind of ruined some of his season grade that year. I mean, he was outstanding. I mean, and that was that 2015 Denver Broncos team. That was as good of a defense as we've seen the last 8 to 10 years, right up there with the 2013 Seahawks. Of course, they won the Super Bowl. So Harris playing in that man coverage scheme for Wade Phillips for a couple of years, he was excellent there as well. So he has really excelled while doing it all. And not to compare him directly to Richard Sherman, they truly do actually play essentially different positions, different. They're asked to do different things. But the thing we always say about Sherman, he's been in the Seattle scheme, and then he's gone to the 49ers scheme, which is the Seattle scheme. He's done the same thing over and over. Patrick Peterson just finally went to a slightly different system last year and did perform well. But Harris has had to switch it up a lot through the years, from Jack Del Rio, Wade Phillips, Vance Joseph, a lot of different styles that he's performed well in.
Yeah, so a lot of people get termed as versatile, or versatility gets used as the descriptor for a lot of people when it's not necessarily good. Right? It's just that they do a lot of things, most of them bad, but just doing a lot of things, people call them versatile. Harris has this incredible versatility when all of it is good. Like, his ability to do a bunch of things well is maybe unmatched over the sort of time PFF has been grading defensive backs. I'm not sure there's been anybody that's been able to do everything consistently as well as him. Revis probably, but it's a pretty short list. I can't name too many other guys. Antoine Winfield for his time when he was at his best.
By the way, I'd say
similar kind of deal in terms of doing everything well.
Probably closer. I would say Revis is in a
he did everything to an absurd level.
Different world, man.
The point is just the number of people where you can say they do everything well. There's not a single system we could plug him into, or a single thing we can ask him to do where he's not good at it.
Right.
So I'm not saying Chris Harris is as good as Revis is, but in terms of listing players that can do everything well, I mean, I can only think of 3 off the top of my head, of which he's one. Yeah.
So no matter which way you break it down, he came into the league in 2011, and he's pretty much a top 3 corner during that time. We've seen peak Revis. We've seen peak Sherman. From a consistency standpoint, I think Harris is right up there. Maybe Patrick Peterson is in that discussion. But as far as longevity during that time, I mean, Harris is kind of the guy. So hasn't really shown. I mean, he had a slight downtick in 2017. He was good, not great. I mean, he was good. He was very good last year still. He's had a few more injuries.
Interesting because it's bounced every other year to an elite grade. He's gone from elite to good to elite to good to elite to good.
Well, that's kind of the nature of cornerback play, right? Because a lot of it truly is dependent on, if you do have Antonio Brown being targeted 10 times against Antonio Brown in a given game or whatever it might be. But there is a level of consistency there that is that has, I think, separated Chris Harris from everyone else.
Can I give you a statistic?
Yes.
So in the last decade, so 2010 onwards, this decade, the decade of the 2010s, there have been 11 cornerback seasons in PFF that have a coverage grade above 90, and Harris has 3 of them.
Wow, there you go. So that's pretty good of him. Pretty good. Anyone else have multiple? Sherman must have a couple.
Sherman has the best. Casey Hayward is up there. No, I don't think anybody else has more than 1.
So there you go, Chris Harris.